I never imagined that a friendship I had cherished for a full decade would one day reveal itself to be nothing more than a shadow-hiding entitlement, ego, and manipulation. When you've known someone since your early teenage years, you tend to assume the bond you share is unshakable. I met Mark when I was barely 11, and over the years we created memories that, at the time, felt permanent. From summer nights spent laughing about nothing to comforting each other when life got tough, it seemed like the kind of friendship people spend their lives searching for. But time changes people, and sometimes it exposes truths that had always been there but buried under layers of convenience. Mark had always been charismatic, the type of guy who carried himself like he owned every room he stepped into. He was good-looking in the conventional sense, tall, with neatly styled hair and a self-assured smile. He had a way of making people gravitate toward him, but beneath that surface confidence was something darker: entitlement. It showed up in the smallest ways, the way he would dismiss other people's opinions as if his mattered more, or the way he used to roll his eyes whenever his girlfriend at the time needed something from him. At first I brushed it off. Everyone has flaws, I told myself. Nobody is perfect. Through high school, we leaned on each other. I was the girl who had her heart broken by boys who didn't know how to treat her right, and he was the boy who liked to play savior, the one who gave advice but rarely practiced what he preached. He dated casually, moving from one girl to the next, always leaving behind a trail of confusion. Yet, he would tell me that he was just being honest, and that girls should be grateful he didn't lead them on longer. I didn't see it then, but looking back, I realized I was excusing a pattern of cruelty. Fast forward to now. I'm 21, in a relationship with someone who genuinely respects me. My boyfriend isn't flashy. He doesn't try to win people over with charm, but his actions speak louder than any word Mark ever uttered. He works hard for everything he has, unlike Mark, who floats through life cushioned by his parents' wealth. With my boyfriend, I feel safe, valued, and respected. With Mark, I had started to feel uneasy, like I was walking on eggshells, waiting for him to snap or belittle the people around him. When Mark called me yesterday asking if we could meet for lunch, I didn't think much of it. His voice carried a tone of seriousness, almost urgency, and curiosity got the better of me. I showed up at the cafe, spotting him instantly at a table tucked away in the corner. He waved, smiling in that charming way he always did, and for a brief moment, I forgot my recent doubts about him. We ordered lunch, and conversation flowed easily at first. He made jokes, we reminisced about high school drama, and he asked me about my classes. Everything felt normal, until it didn't. After the plates were cleared, he leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and looked at me with an intensity that made my stomach knot. He cleared his throat and said, "I don't understand why you're dating your boyfriend when I'm clearly the better match for you." At first, I thought it was a joke. I laughed lightly, waiting for the punchline. But the humor never came. His eyes were dead serious, and suddenly the atmosphere between us changed. I asked him what he meant, and that's when he unleashed a flood of arrogance. He told me that he had liked me first, that he had been there longer than anyone else, and that by some unwritten rule, that meant he had earned the right to be with me. He went on about how he was taller, better looking, and supposedly more successful than my boyfriend. He pointed out that he knew me better because of our long friendship. His words were dripping with entitlement, as if love was some competition, and he had just presented me with a resume of why he deserved me more than the man I had chosen. Inside, I felt disgust building with every sentence. He had no idea how ridiculous he sounded. He had no idea how unattractive entitlement and arrogance made him. My boyfriend had earned my love through kindness and respect. Mark was trying to claim it through years of hovering and waiting, like I was some prize at the end of a marathon he thought he had been running. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, I sat there silently, gathering my thoughts. My heart was racing, not from flattery, but from anger. After a pause, I asked him, "Do you want me to be completely honest with you?" His lips curled into a smirk, and he leaned forward, almost eagerly, like he thought I was about to confess feelings I had secretly harbored all these years. He nodded and said, "Yes, be honest." And that's when I decided that enough was enough. I told him, "Mark, I would never date you. I've seen the way you treat your girlfriends. You ghost them when you're bored, you treat them like they're disposable, and you expect them to stick around waiting for you to get it together. You're immature. You're irresponsible. And being with you would be exhausting. His smirk faltered. His posture stiffened. But I wasn't finished. I explained that these were the exact reasons I had started to distance myself from him over time. I told him that while I once valued our friendship, I couldn't ignore how poorly he treated the women in his life. And I wasn't about to reward him with a relationship after watching him leave a trail of broken hearts behind him. Silence fell between us like a curtain dropping on a stage. For the first time in years, Mark had no snappy comeback, no charming laugh, no smooth deflection. He just sat there, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, as though he had never heard someone tell him the truth so bluntly. After what felt like an eternity, he pushed back his chair, muttered something about needing to go, and left without even finishing his drink. I sat there alone, my heart pounding, a strange mix of adrenaline and relief coursing through me. Walking home, I felt lighter, like a burden I didn't even know I was carrying had finally been lifted. For years, I had excused his behavior. For years, I had allowed him to stand in my life like some shadowy figure waiting for a chance to step forward. And finally, I had spoken the truth that had been simmering inside me all along. But later that evening, my phone buzzed with notifications. Our mutual friends were blowing up my messages, asking what I had done to Mark. They said he had been drinking, sulking, refusing to talk to anyone, and playing the victim. Some of them accused me of being too harsh, of breaking him. Their words infuriated me. Why was I the villain for speaking the truth? Why was I expected to protect a man's fragile ego at the cost of my own boundaries? I explained to them what happened, that he tried to claim me like an object, that he disrespected my relationship, and that I finally told him what no one else had the courage to say. Some of them doubled down, saying I should have been gentler, that I should have let him down easy. But deep down I knew this wasn't about harshness. It was about accountability. And Mark had never faced accountability in his life. That night, I blocked him. I blocked the friends who chose his side too. And as the silence filled the space where his presence used to be, I realized something powerful. I wasn't losing a friend. I was shedding dead weight, because Mark was never truly my friend. He was just waiting, lurking, convinced that one day I would owe him my love. But love isn't owed. Love is chosen, and I chose better for myself. The next morning, I woke up with a strange heaviness in my chest. For a brief second, before my brain fully remembered yesterday's events, life felt normal. Then it all came crashing back. The lunch with Mark, the look on his face when I told him the truth, the flood of messages from our mutual friends. My phone sat silent on the nightstand, still buzzing faintly with notifications I had no interest in reading. I already knew what they would say. More accusations, more guilt trips, more reminders that, somehow, in their eyes, I was the one who had done the damage. I rolled onto my back and stared at the ceiling. A part of me wanted to second-guess myself. Had I been too harsh? Could I have phrased things differently? But the moment that doubt crept in, I thought about the way Mark had looked at me across that table, like I was a possession he had been cheated out of, like my choices didn't matter because he had claimed me first. The memory hardened my resolve. No, I hadn't been too harsh. I had been honest. Brutally honest, maybe, but the kind of honest he needed to hear. By midday, more mutual friends reached out, this time not with accusations but with curiosity. "What happened at lunch?" one asked. "Why is Mark acting like he's heartbroken?" another demanded. Apparently, he had started telling people that I had led him on for years, that I had used him for emotional support, while secretly knowing I would never give him a chance. My blood boiled when I read that. Lead him on? I thought back through a decade of friendship. Never once had I hinted at wanting him romantically. Never once had I made promises I didn't intend to keep. If anything, I had gone out of my way to make sure he knew we were just friends. But in his narrative, I was the villain who strung him along until he broke. It was maddening, the way entitlement twists reality. He couldn't accept that his own actions and arrogance were the reason I rejected him. No, it had to be my fault. It had to be that I had wronged him. That night, I sat down with my boyfriend and told him everything. He listened quietly, his face shifting from concern to anger as I recounted the lunch conversation and the fallout afterward. When I finished, he reached across the table and took my hand. "You don't owe that guy anything," he said firmly. "You never did. He's just upset because he thought waiting around entitled him to you. That's not love. That's control." His words were a balm to my raw nerves. In that moment, I realized how lucky I was to be with someone who understood boundaries, who respected me enough to let me choose freely. It highlighted the stark difference between him and Mark. The next few days blurred together, each one bringing fresh rumors and whispers from people in our circle. Some friends cut me off without explanation, clearly siding with Mark. Others stayed neutral, pretending not to take sides, but their silence spoke volumes. A few, though, quietly reached out to support me. One even admitted, "Honestly, we've all noticed how Mark treats girls. You just had the guts to say what we were too afraid to." That message stuck with me. It reminded me that while some people were angry with me for shattering Mark's ego, others saw the truth for what it was. And maybe, just maybe, my words would ripple further than I realized. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something chilling. If Mark could twist the story so quickly, painting himself as the victim and me as the villain, what else was he capable of? Could I really say I knew him at all? 10 years of friendship suddenly felt like 10 years of lies. It dawned on me that maybe I had never truly known the real Mark. Maybe the version of him I had in my head was just an illusion built on childhood nostalgia and wishful thinking. Late one night, I sat scrolling through old photos. There we were at 16, laughing with ice cream cones in hand. At 18, posing in caps and gowns, arms slung around each other like siblings. At 20, celebrating a birthday, his smile wide and confident. Looking back at those pictures, I realized the signs had been there all along. The arrogance, the dismissiveness, the way he always needed to be the center of attention. I just hadn't wanted to see it. I had been clinging to the comfort of familiarity, mistaking longevity for loyalty. The more I reflected, the angrier I became, not just at him, but at myself. How many times had I excused his behavior because he was just Mark? How many times had I ignored my own discomfort because I didn't want to rock the boat? That realization hit hard. It wasn't just about him. It was about me learning to enforce boundaries sooner, to trust my instincts when something felt off. In the days that followed, Mark didn't reach out directly, probably because I had already blocked him everywhere, but he found ways to make his presence known. Through mutual friends, I heard he was still drinking heavily, still telling his sob story to anyone who would listen. Some of them pitied him. Some cheered him on, telling him I had been cruel. Others started to drift away from him, slowly realizing his version of events didn't quite add up. I didn't confront him again. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than any argument could have been. Every time he tried to drag my name through the mud, people eventually started asking, "But isn't this the same guy who ghosts every girlfriend he has? The one who never takes responsibility?" The cracks in his mask were starting to show. And that, I realized, was the sweetest form of revenge. Not screaming, not fighting, but letting him unravel under the weight of his own lies. Still, the experience changed me. I became more cautious about who I let into my inner circle. I started paying closer attention to the way people treated others, not just me. Because how someone treats the people they don't need says more about their character than how they treat the ones they want something from. Mark had wanted me to see him as the hero of our story. But in reality, he was the cautionary tale. And in cutting him off, I wasn't just ending a toxic friendship. I was reclaiming my power. The silence in the house was the loudest sound she had ever heard. After the storm of arguments, the slamming of doors, and the breaking of trust, quietness had wrapped itself around every corner like a heavy fog. She sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the wall that once felt like home, but now it looked like nothing more than paint on plaster. Every memory inside this room used to feel warm, like snapshots of laughter, whispered promises, and plans for the future. Now each corner seemed to echo betrayal. She could almost see the ghosts of her past self, smiling, believing, holding on to words that had no meaning. Her mind replayed the confrontation again and again, the look on his face when the truth was finally dragged into the light, the excuses, the shifting eyes, the sudden anger when caught. She thought if she exposed the lies, she would feel lighter. But instead, the weight had doubled. It wasn't just about him anymore. It was about everything she had lost in the process: trust, innocence, and the belief that love could protect her from pain. Nights became endless. She would lie awake, tracing the cracks on the ceiling, asking herself where it all went wrong. Was there a moment she should have seen? Was there a word, a touch, or a silence that should have been the warning? These questions burned inside her like fire, and no matter how many times she replayed the story in her head, no answer was ever enough. Because betrayal is never logical. It comes like a thief, sudden, ruthless, leaving behind nothing but ruins. The world outside continued to spin. Cars moved on the streets. Neighbors went about their routines. Laughter echoed from children playing nearby. Yet inside her heart, time had stopped. She carried her pain like invisible glass shards pressing into her skin with every breath. And though no one could see the bleeding, it didn't mean it wasn't real. Friends called, family checked in, but every conversation felt like noise. People said the usual lines: "You're strong, you'll get through this," or "Everything happens for a reason." But she wanted to scream, because strength wasn't what she felt, and no reason could justify the way her life had been ripped apart. She didn't want shallow comfort. She wanted her life back, the one before lies poisoned it. And yet, a small voice inside her whispered that maybe this was where her true journey began. Not the life with him, not the life built on fragile illusions, but the one where she discovered who she really was, when everything was taken away. Still, that voice was faint, drowned by the louder screams of grief and anger. She walked into the living room, where the photo frames still sat on the shelves. Happy moments frozen in time, his arm around her, smiles wide, eyes full of dreams. She picked one up, staring at the two strangers in the picture. Strangers, that's what they felt like now. She didn't know the man in that photo anymore, and maybe she didn't even know the version of herself who had trusted him so blindly. Her hand trembled as she set the frame back down. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her head. Should she destroy these pictures? Erase every trace of him? Burn it all until nothing remained? Or should she keep them, not as memories of love, but as lessons carved into her soul, reminders never to forget what betrayal looks like? The decision pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. The truth was, healing wasn't a straight path. It was messy, unpredictable, like waves crashing without warning. Some days she felt a surge of strength, like she could rebuild her life brick by brick. Other days she sank so deep into sorrow that even getting out of bed felt impossible. But in the midst of it all, there was a tiny spark that refused to die, a whisper that told her this wasn't the end of her story. Because maybe, just maybe, betrayal wasn't the last chapter. Maybe it was just the painful middle. The storm outside matched the storm inside her chest. Rain tapped against the windows like restless fingers, and the sky carried the same weight she felt pressing down on her shoulders. It had been months since the confrontation, since the betrayal had torn her world apart, but the scars it left behind were still raw, still pulsing with reminders of everything she lost. People thought healing was a timeline, 30 days, 90 days, a year. They thought grief followed neat stages, as if her heart could schedule its pain the way a calendar marks appointments. But reality was crueler than that. Healing wasn't linear. Some mornings she would wake up with a strange kind of peace, even hope. She would sip her coffee, watch the sunrise, and feel like maybe, just maybe, she was moving forward. Then, by evening, one memory, one song, one careless word from a friend would rip her open again. The betrayal still haunted her dreams. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, sheets twisted around her body like chains. In her dreams, she was always back at that lunch table, hearing his words all over again, watching the smug expression on his face as he tried to convince her he was the better choice. And she'd always feel the same anger, the same disbelief, the same bone-deep exhaustion. It wasn't just what he said, it was what it revealed. The entitlement, the arrogance, the way he believed she owed him something simply because he existed in her life. And perhaps the cruelest part of all was how people around her reacted. They weren't there when he said those words, but they had the nerve to tell her she had been too harsh, that she had broken him, that she should have been gentler. She wanted to scream at them. Do you not see the pattern? Do you not see the way he uses women like toys, discards them when bored, and then expects them to wait for him like obedient shadows? But she didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply stepped back, one block button at a time, until silence replaced the noise. That silence was lonely, yes, but it was also liberating. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight of his presence, his expectations, his manipulations disguised as friendship. She was learning how to breathe again. But the path forward wasn't just about forgetting him. It was about rebuilding herself, and that was the hardest part. Because betrayal doesn't just take away trust in another person, it steals trust in yourself. She second-guessed every decision now. She wondered if she could ever trust her instincts again, if she could ever believe her own judgment. She looked at her reflection, and sometimes struggled to recognize the person staring back. Who was she without him? Without the shadow of that toxic friendship? Without the years of pretending his flaws weren't so bad? That question kept her awake at night. But slowly, painfully, she began to find answers in small moments. She started journaling. Not pretty words, not poetic lines, but raw, unfiltered thoughts. Pages and pages filled with rage, sorrow, confusion, and the slow flickers of hope. She poured everything onto the paper, and though the words couldn't erase the hurt, they gave her space to breathe. She also began saying no more often. No to people who drained her energy. No to friends who demanded explanations but never offered support. No to the expectations that told her she had to move on faster than she was ready. Every no felt like reclaiming a piece of herself that had been lost. And then came the yeses. Yes to walks in the rain, where the drops disguised her tears. Yes to laughing too loud at stupid jokes, even if the laughter cracked through pain. Yes to trying things she had once been too scared to do. Painting, cooking complicated recipes, even traveling to places she had always postponed visiting. These yeses stitched her back together, one fragile thread at a time. But healing isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It comes quietly, almost unnoticed, like the way dawn creeps across the sky. One day she realized she hadn't thought of him in hours. Then one day in a whole afternoon. And finally, there came a day where she laughed without the shadow of his betrayal echoing in her chest. That was the day she knew she was not broken anymore. Bruised, yes, scarred, definitely, but not broken. And in that realization, a question burned inside her. What do I do with this strength now? Do I let it end here, or do I turn it into something bigger? Because surviving betrayal is one thing, but turning that survival into a story that inspires others, that was a different kind of power. Time has a way of reshaping wounds. What once felt like an open cut now looked more like a scar, visible, but no longer bleeding. Months had passed, and with each day, she realized the betrayal that once consumed her no longer defined her. Yes, it shaped her. Yes, it taught her. But it was no longer her cage. Mark had vanished from her life like smoke carried away by the wind. At first, she wondered what became of him. Whether he had learned, whether he still sat with bitterness, whether he regretted the arrogance that had cost him not just her friendship, but his own dignity. But eventually she stopped caring. His story wasn't hers to carry anymore. His redemption, or lack of it, was his burden, not hers. Her own story, however, was still being written. And it wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation. She began to notice the small victories. The way her chest didn't tighten anymore when people mentioned his name. The way she could walk past familiar places, the cafe, the park bench, the streets they once walked together, without feeling her knees buckle under the weight of memories. Freedom, she realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about no longer letting the past control the present. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink, she sat with her journal open. Instead of writing about pain, she wrote about gratitude. Gratitude for lessons learned. Gratitude for the resilience she never knew she had. Gratitude for the clarity betrayal had given her. Clarity about what she deserved, what she would no longer tolerate, and who she was becoming. She wrote about the women she had watched him hurt before, women who had been silenced or dismissed. She wished she could reach out to each of them and say, "You weren't crazy. You weren't weak. You were caught in the orbit of someone who thrived on control. And you deserved better." And in that wish came an idea. Maybe her revenge wasn't meant to be dramatic or explosive. Maybe her revenge was meant to be quiet but powerful, living a life so full, so authentic, that his memory would fade into irrelevance. Maybe revenge was simply healing so completely that his existence no longer had the power to wound her. She smiled at the thought. It wasn't the kind of revenge movies were made about, but it was the kind of revenge that gave peace, and peace was priceless. Still, she couldn't deny the poetic satisfaction in knowing that while she had grown, healed, and thrived, he was left with nothing but the echo of his own arrogance. Everyone who once defended him had seen the truth in time. People eventually recognized patterns, and his charm was no longer enough to cover the cracks. She didn't have to lift a finger. Karma had done the work for her. One night, while scrolling through her phone, she stumbled on a group chat she had long muted. Messages buzzed with gossip. Mark had burned bridges with nearly everyone. His selfishness, his recklessness, his entitlement, it had all caught up with him. He was alone, spiraling, and still pointing fingers at everyone but himself. For a moment she felt a sting of pity, but it passed quickly. Pity was dangerous. Pity could trick the heart into reopening doors that were meant to stay shut. So she let the news roll off her like rain on glass. She closed the chat, deleted it, and whispered to herself, "Not my problem anymore." Her real problem, and her real solution, was embracing the future. She stood before the mirror one morning, hair still messy, eyes still carrying the faint traces of tiredness. But for the first time in forever, she smiled at her reflection. It wasn't a perfect smile, but it was hers. And in that smile, she saw survival. She saw strength. She saw a woman who had been tested and had risen from the ashes of disappointment stronger than she ever imagined. Her story wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't about perfect love or flawless endings. It was about endurance, about betrayal teaching her not weakness, but wisdom, about learning that sometimes the greatest revenge isn't about proving someone wrong. It's about proving yourself right. She closed her journal and whispered softly, as if speaking to the universe itself, "I choose me. I choose peace. I choose to walk forward without chains." And with that choice, the cycle was broken. So what do we learn from this? That betrayal doesn't have to be the end. That being underestimated, disrespected, or discarded doesn't define you. It frees you. Because once the illusion shatters, all that's left is the truth. And the truth is, you are stronger than the people who tried to break you. Sometimes, revenge isn't loud. It's not fire or fury. Sometimes the sweetest revenge is silence, growth, and the smile you wear when you realize their absence no longer hurts. And now I'll ask you, what do you think she should have done? Should she have given him a softer truth? Or did she do the right thing by cutting him out completely? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because I know so many of you have lived through something similar. If this story hit home for you, tap that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you've ever witnessed karma serve justice in the most unexpected way, tell us in the comments. I'd love to read your stories. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful tales of betrayal, revenge, and healing. Because sometimes, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well.